let's just make sure this is a good, clean sound, and we'll deal with it later on in the mixing process. And the antidote to that is, I guess, what Joe taught you.
Yeah, I mean, and that's important at times, right? Like, you obviously don't want to put like an 1176 on like the stereo orchestra mic when you're recording it at the concert. Like, you got to know when is it safe to do that. But at the same time, it's like, we're making music. We're not like performing surgery. Like, if something doesn't sound that great, like, and you want to redo it, like, it's kind of part of the record making process a little bit.
Take that risk.
Exactly. No one's going to die if the vocal's a little over compressed. You're probably going to compress it more, anyway.
Yeah.
Just make sure that the overcompression sounds good.
Right. Totally. Who else did you learn from?
So Jimmy Douglas, right? And
oh yeah,
he's amazing. Like, he's just like so natural at it. Like, you never really, you don't even know like if he is even aware of what he's doing, but he just like does stuff and it suddenly sounds better. Like, he just like touches the faders and you're like, what did you do? He's like, I don't know. And it's like, the mix sounds great. Like, Manny Marroquin was another really transformative session for me. He's obviously like the world's greatest mixer practically. And
yeah, his mixes for like John Mayer are like my favorite mixes.
Yeah.
So
he's kind of who introduced me to the idea of building the mix up track by track and kind of not necessarily focusing on the whole arrangement all at once. And I definitely picked up some ideas about EQ from Manny. For example, he will adjust the volume of an instrument or a vocal with the fader while he is EQing. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. When you're adjusting a fader, it's the overall amplitude of that sound, right? But when you're adjusting EQ, it's the amplitude of that range of frequencies that you're controlling. So why do them as two separate processes? It's you're controlling the tonality and energy of this sound in its position relative to everything else. So he does a lot of tweaking of the volume position of the volume while he's EQing to see, does it sound good if I scoop here and then push the volume up? Or does it sound good if I boost a little bit here and then pull the volume back?
Wow.
So
that's so cool.
And it's not stuff that he's necessarily like telling you like, this is what I do. It's like more stuff you observe,
Wow. I've never heard of that before. I mean, I know like, you do makeup gain afterwards with an EQ, but that's a completely different ballpark,
Yeah. It becomes more fluid and kind of more of an intuitive process, and sort of seeing him work in that way was really interesting to kind of, it reminded me like the mix. He talked a lot about right brain or left brain, with the idea being that one side of the brain is very logic focused, very process oriented, very sort of technical. And then the other part of the brain is more artistic and creative and intuitive. And so there's times and places for both of those sides of ourselves in a mix. Like, obviously you have to manage your headroom and you have to not, export an MP3. You gotta do the right things technically. Like, you do have to have a mastery and understanding of the technical side. But if you really want to make mixes that sound good, you have to really be an artist with it. And that's where being able to not worry so much about the technical issues. Like, if there's a lot of red lights, it's Christmas time. There's lights, like whatever it is, like let the lights go on. Like, if something's distorting or clipping on the board, like, does it sound bad? Like, don't look at the meter. Is it sound good when you overdrive this? Kind of relying on that creative instinct a bit. So that was a big takeaway for me. It was like, be creative. Don't worry so much. Focus on the creative side first and kind of let that intuitive, mix. Like, rather than thinking so arbitrary, like, okay, I'm going to mix the vocal, then I'm going to mix the bass, then I'm going to mix the drums. Like, just kind of like bounce around the different instruments as you're inspired.
Cool. Is that how you know Sam Sherbin? Because I know that he was our connection.
I met Sam. He did a Manny Marroquin session a few years prior to the when I did, and I actually met Sam through one of the guys I went to the Tom Elmhurst session with, who was friends with him.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
'Cause that's a lot of what he talked about on our podcast episode.
Yeah.
Super cool.
So the last one I did was Greg Wells, who is very much a producer, also a very accomplished engineer and mixer. And Greg is really like a musician's musician. He plays all the instruments, like he knows all the notes. Like he's a master producer. And I think what I picked up from Greg was mostly working with artists and thinking about the role of a producer in the studio and kind of how do you help the artist be comfortable, and kind of how do you kind of know when to stay out of the way and kind of know what's important kind of in any given moment, like reading the rooms kind of stuff. And he also does really interesting engineering stuff too. Like I remember I saw him split up a snare drum into 3 tracks, and he would do different processing for different parts of the snare drum, and thinking like, that's so cool. Like he's a very accomplished drummer. And he's so drum focused on his productions. He really does spends a lot of time on getting the drum sound. So there's I could talk for hours about it. There's so many tidbits that are great from all of them.
Amazing. Wait, let's talk a bit about monitoring, because I saw your ATCs in your control room, and looks like you're totally set up for mastering.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about is that how you mix also, through ATCs?
Sure.
Or
I've gone through a variety of speakers over the years. I started with some Tannoys, and then I got some Adams, and then after Adams, I got ATCs, and then in addition to ATCs, I also got some Amphions, which I really like, and I basically I've also had mix cubes, like Oratone style mix cubes. Basically, ATC I think is the most it presents the vocal in the most natural way. Partly that's due to the design of the crossovers, where the mid-range driver basically carries most of the sound of the voice. So you hear a very low distortion presentation of instruments and voice specifically with ATC. And I feel like when I'm working on ATCs, I don't hear the speaker, I hear the sound. And they're very, very clean, very, very low distortion. They're sometimes a little unexciting because they're not hyping things and making things sound thumpy and kind of fat. You have to do that if you want it to sound that way. But ATC really is it's one of the most amazing sounding speaker lines. And I'm currently, in my temporary setup, I'm using the ATC SEM12i Pros, which are actually their smallest passive speaker, which is a 2-way, believe it or not. And this is the bottom of the line ATC. And this sounds, I've been doing some great mixes on these, but in the main studio, I have a ATC SEM110, which is a 3-way upper cabinet for left and right. And then I have their custom 15-inch subwoofers for bass extension. And those are wall-mounted speakers in a custom isolation assembly that I engineered in conjunction with my studio designer, Horacio Malvicino.
Whoa, that's crazy. It sounds like an audiophile's dream.
Yeah. I mean, speakers really are your eyes, and you can't work without a good set of speakers that you trust and that you know, and that the room works for you. That being said, I'm working presently in a essentially untreated space, and because I know these speakers really well, I feel like I can get what I need to get out of it. But that's not to say that you don't need treatment. Treatment is really important, especially when you have larger speakers that are stimulating more energy in the room.
Right. So let's talk about mastering for a second. So I'm assuming you're not mastering the same tracks that you're mixing.
Sometimes I do. I've done it all different ways. Some people come to me because they want the full service approach, and I've kind of developed that as a routine where people will come to the studio and I will give them, a distribution ready master at the end of the day. I've also sent stuff out to select engineers who I trust and like their work. And then in addition to people that come to me for recording and production and mixing, people also come to me specifically for mastering. So have years of experience offering all of the services. When I am mastering something that I have mixed, it's a pretty direct conduit from mix to distribution. I'm very conscious when I am mixing that this should sound like the finished record. I don't leave something for the mastering engineer to do. And I really discourage people from doing that. If you need to EQ the mix to get it to sound like what you think it should sound like, do that. Don't be like, oh, he has better EQs, he'll add the top end. It's no. Make it sound like a finished record right now. That's not to say slap a limiter on it and then that's done. The limiter is really the least important thing, in my opinion. So when I'm mixing, I'm cognizant of this, and I am mixing with the intention of delivering a final product. And then if I feel like I need to do final tweaks after I've gotten the mix approval and I've gotten the go-ahead to do the mastering, I will go in and I'll do a few tweaks. And I like actually doing those tweaks in the context of the mix session because, hey, like that's every mastering engineer's dream, is to be able to actually change the mix, right?
Right. Yeah,
so I do that. And I reference on a lot of different systems, and I feel confident that I don't need to like go to 2 different separate studios to make it work. And many of the things that, go through my space, I also master. When it comes to stuff that comes in for mastering only, then it's more of a traditional approach where you're like, okay, I have this mix and I have a distribution format, target that I'm supposed to be conscious of, whether that's streaming or CD or vinyl. And then I will adjust my approach accordingly.
Nice. Yeah, it's so interesting because we're all, when we're mixing, we're referencing mastered tracks, right?
Yeah.
We're not referencing mixes. We're only mastering. We're only referencing the masters. So it's like, yeah, we're obviously just trying to get as close as possible to the master while we're mixing.
Yeah.
For me, I feel like with the mastering engineer, it's like just to know that someone else has listened to it in a different room with maybe better monitors than me, and also like, did I get the amount of sub and top end right? Like maybe I missed the ball there a tiny bit. It's just getting that last set of ears to just okay all that stuff. You know what I mean?
For sure. There's always a benefit to getting more feedback. And something I do a lot of with people actually is mix feedback prior to mastering. So people will send me their mixes and then I'll comment on them. I'll give them specific notes and then they will make those tweaks and then they'll send me the files to master. And that's a really great workflow, especially nowadays where people don't necessarily have the budget for full mixing, but they want the benefit of someone who has experience and a good listening environment. You can basically get so much value from that, having that collaborative relationship with people. And I love that. I love getting mixes to listen to and, give feedback to.
Yeah, so fun. And in terms of mastering, are you going out of the box? Are you sticking in the box? Do you have like any tried and true
it's kind
techniques?
of all of it. It's all of it. For me, mastering is really all about tonality, actually. If you think about it, people have overemphasized loudness in mastering, but loudness has never been the purpose of mastering, actually. The purpose of mastering has been to correct for tonality and to make the tonal presentation suitable for the distribution formats.
Right.
If you have too much bass, if you have too much treble, those are actually the things that is kind of like where the money is in the mastering, like in terms of the bang for your buck. If your master EQ curve is correct, then everything else is easier. The dynamics fall into place. The loudness targeting is much less challenging. And so I always focus on that. However, I don't do the EQ as the first process. I actually will do the final loudness enhancement to the target reference level first, and then I will EQ preceding that process to correct for the tonality while compensating for any tonal change that the loudness processing has done. So I limit first in terms of the order of operations, but then prior to the limiter, I'm doing EQ.
Got it. Yeah, the guys on the Attack and Release show have talked about also, it's like how the EQ curve of the mix is of the master is like where the loudness comes from, not actually the limiter.
Yeah.
So super cool. Yeah, I gotta try digging deeper into mastering. I don't know. It sounds cool.
Well, it's another one of those things. It's like, don't be scared of it. Like, you know how to EQ, you know how to compress, you know how to limit. Like, try it.
Yeah.
You know?
I think my issue with mastering is I hate mastering my own mixes.
Yeah.
Because I really do want that objective third party.
Yes.
But maybe like mastering someone else's mixes might not be as challenging for me.
Yeah.
I don't know. Might be worth checking out.
Yeah. Well, a lot of some of my skill set with mastering came about from working in hip hop and rap where I'm getting a 2-track, like I'm doing a mixtape project and I've only got the 2-track. And how do I hype up this 2-track and make it sound good and then gel that with the vocals, right? So some of that sort of like mix specific processing and playing around with again, with the limitations of working with a 2-track file, can also